Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious financial plays of the last century. We're not talking about stocks or real estate, we're talking about the blueprint of life itself, our genes. This is the story of the gene gold rush. I know, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? A world where a corporation could own a piece of you. But, for decades, this wasn't fiction. It was a very real, very legal, and multi-billion-dollar reality. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the shocking legal argument that let companies patent your genes. Then we'll follow the money and see how they built a monopoly. We'll explore the real human cost, witness the huge legal battle that changed everything, and finally, we'll look at where this fight is headed next.
Okay, first things first. How on earth could anyone claim to own a human gene? Well, the answer lies in a really clever and frankly super controversial legal workaround.
You see, the U.S. Patent Office drew a very fine line. They said, look, you can't patent a gene while it's inside the human body. That's just nature. But, and this is the billion-dollar but, they argued that if a company isolates that gene in a lab, it suddenly becomes a man-made invention, a patentable chemical compound. And for decades, that one little argument was enough to open the floodgates. And this whole thing didn't just happen in a vacuum. You had major players pushing this forward. Companies like Myriad Genetics in healthcare and Monsanto in agriculture were at the tip of the spear. And they were backed up by the U.S. Patent Office, the agency that was just rubber stamping thousands of these patents. Then the whole system went global thanks to the World Trade Organization, which basically forced these patent laws on the rest of the world. It was a perfectly designed system for making a ton of money. So with the legal stuff sorted, these companies built an incredibly powerful financial machine. This was never just about scientific discovery. It was about cornering a market. Let's dig into how it actually worked. The business model was actually brutally simple. Just 3 steps. First, you get the patent on the gene or the seed, which gives you ownership for 20 years. Second, you use that patent to wipe out all your competition. You become the only game in town. And third, once you have that monopoly locked down, you can charge whatever you want and hire an army of lawyers to sue anybody who gets in your way. And oh, did they monetize it? Just by owning the patents on 2 key breast cancer genes, Myriad Genetics built an empire worth $500 million a year. Think about that. There were no alternatives. If you needed that potentially life-saving test, you had to pay their price because there was literally nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, over in agriculture, Monsanto wasn't just in the business of selling seeds, they were in the business of policing them. They spent $10 million a year on a team of 75 people whose only job was to investigate and sue farmers. Legal enforcement wasn't just a cost of doing business, it was an offensive weapon, a profit center. And don't for a second think this was just a U.S. thing. The TRIPS agreement back in 1994 was the engine that took this whole model global. It basically strong-armed developing nations into adopting America's strict patent laws, creating a worldwide playing field for these gene monopolies. But this whole business model wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It came with a profound human cost. Behind all the patents and the profits were real people, and they were facing some pretty devastating consequences. The impact was severe. For patients, Myriad's monopoly meant you couldn't get a second opinion on your test results. The costs were sky high, and it actually slowed down scientific research. And for farmers, Monsanto's patents destroyed a tradition that was thousands of years old, the basic right to save seeds from your own harvest to plant the next year. And the legal pressure was just relentless. We're talking 90 lawsuits against 147 individual farmers and 39 small farm businesses. They went after farmers whose fields were accidentally contaminated by pollen from a neighbor's farm. Under patent law, it didn't even matter if it was an accident. The farmer was still on the hook. And the financial damage was staggering. Monsanto won over $15 million in recorded judgments. But you have to remember, that's just the public number. That doesn't even count all the confidential, out-of-court settlements that were used to silence farmers and hide the true scale of this legal warfare. Now, the hunt for patents didn't just stop at high-tech labs. It went global, leading to something called biopiracy. This is where corporations would basically take traditional knowledge and natural resources from indigenous communities, patent them, and profit from them, often without any permission or compensation. And you see this pattern again and again.
Corporations would take knowledge that was common for centuries in places like India, like using the neem tree as a fungicide or turmeric for healing, and then go file for U.S. patent. They even tried it with basmati rice. Now, a lot of these patents were eventually fought and overturned, but it took years and years of expensive international legal battles to correct what many people just called outright theft.
So eventually, the human and the financial costs of all this just became too much to ignore. A coalition of patients, doctors, and scientists decided it was time to fight back. And that led to a massive legal showdown that went all the way to the Supreme Court. This was a 15-year war. It kicked off when myriads started sending out cease and desist letters to shut down any competing research. About a decade later, the ACLU jumped in, filing a huge lawsuit. And after years of battling through the lower courts, it all came down to one final showdown at the Supreme Court. And the result? It was an absolute bombshell. In a unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that a naturally occurring DNA segment is a product of nature and it's not patentable just because it's been isolated. With that one sentence, the entire legal foundation of the gene patenting industry just crumbled. Thousands of patents were invalidated, basically overnight. But listen, while that Supreme Court ruling was a historic victory, the battle over who owns the code of life is far from over. The gold rush has simply moved to a new territory. See, the court left one major loophole open. They ruled that synthetic, lab-created DNA, it's called cDNA, is still patentable. And even though it doesn't exist in our bodies naturally, it contains the exact same protein coding information as our real genes. So what this means is the fight has just shifted from patenting what's inside us to patenting a synthetic copy of it. But while that legal fight continues, a different kind of effort was underway to protect our global food supply from this kind of corporate control. A global coalition, recognizing the danger, created a fortress for biodiversity, dug deep inside an Arctic mountain. It's a backup plan, not for profit, but for the survival of humanity. This place, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, is basically humanity's ultimate insurance policy. It stores over 1 million seed samples from all over the planet, protecting our agricultural heritage from corporate patents, from war, and from climate change. It's a powerful statement that the world's genetic diversity should be a shared resource, not a private commodity. And all of this leaves us with a really critical question for our time. The first gene gold rush was all about owning the physical genes themselves. For the most part, that fight has been won. But the new gold rush is for genetic data. As these huge databases of our DNA are being built, the next great battle is going to be over who owns and who profits from the very information that makes you, well, you.
So while markets rise and fall, systems like this quietly move billions behind the scenes, hidden from the public, hidden from scrutiny, and sometimes hidden from the law itself. Because in global finance, the most powerful forces are rarely the most visible. And this is just one of the systems used by the unseen elite.